I'm Kristen Hull, and I'm the founder and CIO at NIA Impact Capital. And NIA means intention and purpose, where we invest with intention and purpose into the economy that we know we need to see for all of us. So fair, just, sustainable, and inclusive. And so we are choosing our portfolio companies based on what will be rewarded by the market because we are here to make our clients investment returns. And we are also here to really help them and enable them to have the economy that they want to see. And I mention all of this on our investment thesis because today we are welcoming the amazing Rebecca Bender to join us. And she works on a different part of our economy that isn't always covered in our investments. And yet she is doing such important work to bring justice and to bring inclusivity to parts of our economy where there are some really big problems and some really big issues. And so I'll be asking Rebecca some questions. We'll be having an interview session. And really the opportunity here is for you all to learn and for her to highlight this really essential work that they're doing at the Rebecca Bender Initiative. And I am so proud to know her. She's an amazing entrepreneur, and she's also an amazing change maker, really promoting women in ways that we're not able to, particularly with our investment dollars. And so we can on the nonprofit side. And so she runs a nonprofit, and where Nia is proud to be making donations to support her work. So with that being said, Rebecca, I'm just going to ask you to share a little bit about how we met, and then welcome you to share some of your original story and why you started this initiative.
Yeah, well, we met, I believe, at a fundraising event. We were on a bus tour I can't remember what city that was. Was it Dallas or?
You know, that's such a good question. Dallas is coming to mind, and it was definitely a women's conference, and where women were getting together to look at their asset allocations, both on the investment side, and I was there to speak about aligning investments with gender lens values, and you were there to speak about how nonprofit dollars could flow to organizations that were really, really game changing. And yes, we were on our way to, I believe they were taking us around on some kind of a city tour, and I said, is anyone sitting here? Or you said, and we sat next to each other on the bus.
Yeah,
Yes.
it was great. It was a great event, and it's always fun to see how people just connect when you're out networking. And we got to sit together on the bus and chatted and became quick friends. And now here we are. It's been a couple years. So I'm so grateful for your guys' support and for everyone that's tuning in today to learn more, not just about what we do, but about this issue and impacts all of our communities. Like Kristen said, my name is Rebecca Bender, and I'm actually a survivor of human trafficking. I was taken off of a college campus when I was 18. I was a young single mom with a new baby trying to put myself through school. And I met a young man on campus that pretended to be my boyfriend. Like most people, I picture human trafficking as kidnapped kids in, white minivans sold overseas. And so my situation wasn't looking like that. I didn't have the red flags to know what I was getting myself into. I wasn't fully aware of what it looks like in the US, how recruitment and grooming take place. I just was completely unaware. I grew up being taught stranger danger, to look out for the person offering you puppy and a candy. And so as this young man dated me for about 6 months, got to know my hopes and my dreams and my fears, I thought I was building, a relationship. I come to find out it was complete fraud. This man was a trafficker. He already had one victim in another city. And so when he invited me to move in with him, I thought, the tables were going to turn. I had met the one, and, you're young and naive, and also had some vulnerabilities, as I think most people, even from good homes, we all have some vulnerabilities. And so after I started packing up my things, he told me that his job was relocating him to Las Vegas. And so I went thinking that I was going to get married and maybe have another baby, and that, finish school out there, just maybe go to transfer or go to community college there. And unfortunately, the day that I arrived, he took my daughter from me and forced me into human trafficking. And For nearly 6 years, I was bought and sold between 3 different traffickers. I had 2 men tattooed their names on my back. I was hospitalized for dehydration and overexhaustion. Um, it was just a horrible 6 years. And oftentimes people say, 6 years is a long time. Like, why didn't you run? Why didn't you ask for help? And my answer is, I did. That's why I'm sitting here. I did eventually run. But even within that 6 years, I had multiple attempted escapes. And I learned what to do better each time one didn't work. I learned where to hide clothes so that I could run quicker. I learned that post 9/11, you can't buy a plane ticket with cash. Most of us probably know that today, but back then I didn't. I got all the way to the airport trying to beg them to sell me a ticket so I could flee, and they wouldn't. Uh, I learned that my trafficker knew where my mom was because I did get all the way home at one of my escapes, and he showed up at my mom's house, which made me really afraid. He was, he was the one I was with the longest, the one at the end of my 6 years. He was very violent. He broke my face in 5 places, left me on the side of the street after beating me nearly to death. And so it was just a really fearful time, just living in this constant state of fear. Fight, flight, or freeze was just constant. You can barely sleep, you can barely eat, you just don't always function. Your mind doesn't always function when you're living in that kind of trauma. But thankfully, in 2006, the feds raided our home and put him in prison for tax evasion. He took a tax evasion plea deal because all of the victims, there was 4 of us in the home, 4 women and 2 children. And we were just really afraid to talk. And he would say things like, I'm only going to get sentenced to a year and I'll be out in 5-6 months and I'll find you if you talk. And so we believed him. We didn't know any better, and law enforcement didn't tell us any better. And so everyone stayed quiet. He took a tax evasion plea deal. 2 of the other women were also sentenced to 13 months in federal prison for tax evasion because a lot of the items that he purchased were in their social security numbers. Thankfully, I got a failure to file, which is an $80,000 fine, but no prison time. And I was able to run and start over. And it was really, really hard starting over with nothing, with a 9-year-old little girl. By now she was, almost 9. It's just frightening. And my only plan was to, at the time, just sleep on couches, get on government assistance, and, get a minimum wage job, or maybe they wouldn't do a background check because I had, obtained a criminal record during this time. You get arrested for things like prostitution or loitering with intent to solicit, things like that the trafficker requires. So your culpability, unfortunately, it can produce sometimes a criminal record. And it was during this time that I was starting to rebuild my life. And I went from a customer service rep at this little motorcycle shop, this little mom and pop shop, to the general manager within 90 days. And I started taking night classes and got a government housing and worked really hard to try to build a new career and a life, and trying to find some amount of financial freedom that is, going to really what true freedom looks like. Time we put trafficked victims right back to the same vulnerabilities that got them trafficked in the first place. We're not really bringing true freedom. We're putting them right back into the same vulnerabilities. Being a young mom, trying to put myself through college, it's like, here I was again. Just now I have this compounded, PTSD and a criminal record and a gap in job history. And so it's even worse vulnerabilities than before, because now you have all these barriers to reentry. And it was during this time I can remember sitting at my kitchen table that I'd gotten at a yard sale. I had a pot and pan from Goodwill for 50 cents. And I remember just sitting there thinking, this can't be it. This can't be freedom. This can't be what all the advocates talk about when you think about fighting trafficking. Like, this doesn't feel really free either. And so I started this journey to really figure out what I was good at, like what talents and gifts I had, and how I was going to try to, just figure out what I was going to do with the rest of my life. And I decided that I wanted to put together kind of a training to help law enforcement specifically, because we had so many interactions where they didn't really understand what we were going through. They didn't understand the trauma bonding or the capture bonding that was taking place. And they created, not a lot of trauma-informed interviewing. Obviously, things have changed substantially since then, but I decided to start a nonprofit. Originally, I just called it the Rebecca Bender Initiative because we didn't totally know where it would go, and it felt like enough freedom to move underneath that umbrella of a title. And I wrote a law enforcement training and it just blew up. I was not expecting. It's been 10 years, and I have now trained over 120,000 law enforcement officers, FBI, Homeland Security, undercover cops. I do undercover operations with Secret Service and local Dallas police or other city police units. I get to work trials and investigations. So we'll have different district attorneys that reach out and say, hey, can you help us on this case? So I'll review evidence. Sometimes I interview the victims, and then I take the stand and testify. And I've loved being a part of that kind of criminal justice reform. When we're talking about systems that we want different in our community, being able to teach them how to identify who's a victim and who's a criminal when you're kind of walking in a room and you don't really know what's going on, and how to really use trauma-informed interviewing tactics to get victims to come forward and talk and to self-identify instead of thinking, no, trafficked kids are overseas. I'm here because my boyfriend is forcing me to be, and trying to get them to see, no, that is trafficking. It might look different domestically, but that same force, fraud, and coercion still exists, even in a developed country. As I was doing these trainings, survivors started to reach out and say, hey, can you teach us how you did that? Like, how did you turn your story into purpose? And at the time I was finishing my master's degree online, and I just remember thinking, if I can get a master's online, I could mentor online. And so I created an online school. I just used the technology that my university was using. It was called Moodle at the time. And I thought, well, let me see how much it is. And it was free. It was completely free. And so I signed up for a Moodle account. I wrote all the curriculum. I put it on there, and we had 5 women show up, 5 survivors show up to the first semester of school. And it was exciting to help other people figure out what they're good at and how they were going to find financial freedom and economic empowerment, because survivors have a huge part of their life that's formative in our professional kind of careers. That's the time when most people are trafficked. 16 to 24 is pretty common for exploitation. And so you realize that this is a time that people have stolen from them. And how do you get a mentor? How do you get your first professor? How do you do a job fair? All of these things that I think most people learn right after high school and into their first year of college is often stolen from them. And so we really wanted to be that component of helping people get free. It was not just the operations and rescue, for lack of better words, moments, although we do help obviously law enforcement with that, but we knew there was kind of a longer freedom plan in mind. And so after that first semester, again, survivors just started hearing about it. And now it's been 8 years since we've launched the school, excuse me, Elevate Academy, and Elevate now has 1,700 students in 717 US cities and 22 countries. And I'm just floored. I'm floored that we'd have so many great, supporters and people that realize that changing the criminal justice system, decreasing arrest, helping people really find real long-term freedom matters in the trajectory of what we're doing to fight trafficking in everyone's communities. And some of that means, community awareness. What does it look like in your community? What does it, how does recruitment take place for vulnerable people in your neighborhood? What is that going to look like if their kids go to school with yours? How would you see the signs? If you're in the grocery store with them or they're your neighbor, like what would you look for? And so it's just been a real humbling and just, I'm really grateful to be able to use all of those 6 years that I didn't know that if I'd make it out of, to be able to make a difference kind of in communities across the country. So that's a little bit about my story and how we got here.
Rebecca, that's just amazing. And you're so inspiring. And I've heard your story a few times now. And I just want to kind of give everyone a moment to take a breath, because that's a lot. And I remember sitting next to you on that bus and then hearing you speak now at several conferences. And it's really intense because, we do have these ideas of how someone gets into sex trafficking. And what I'm learning from you is that it really is, beyond a type of abuse. It's, almost like a kidnapping that you are almost at choice at, but not really, and there's so much coercion and so much, I remember you just telling stories about, you have this baby, and so you're going to do whatever it takes for your child to survive and thrive. And so meaning that you're living in this completely abusive situation. And the other part too, that you do get a criminal record. because they are coercing you, making you do things that aren't legal, and then the record goes to you. And, so all of the things that it takes, not to mention, which you did kind of go into a little bit, um, the abuse on your own psyche and, who you are, because you did mention you're not getting the same skills that another young woman would be getting at those ages, but at the same time, how building back up your self-esteem and just watching you do that and then training others. And the other piece that I really want to point out, if it wasn't already super clear, is that Rebecca really works on a systems-wide way. So she's working with individuals, doing trainings, empowering um, survivors to be thrivers, and the work with the police academies is really, really interesting to me. Will you just share, like if we were in a grocery store too, what are you telling the police, or what are you telling people to look for, just so that we're a little bit aware more of what the nuance of your work is?
Yeah, sometimes I think, I'm sure we all have an image of trafficking when we think of trafficking, and usually it's from Google Images or something we've seen in a movie. But the reality is there's 25 types of human trafficking in America alone. Usually there's 6 common types of trafficking in all of our neighborhoods. There's illicit massage, so looking at strip malls, seeing which potential reflexology or massage center is open 24 hours, that keeps their curtains shut, that has bright neon lights, that right? Like when you walk in, there's not actually any massage on the menu. It's like 30 minutes or 60 is the only 2 options. Those are some things that people can see. There is like a strip mall owner association, the STOA, that does some trainings on how to identify if they're leasing potentially a building to an illicit massage parlor versus a regular actual massage center or a reflexology center. A lot of counties have even passed laws around some of the certification from the city on massage, and that's why now we're seeing a lot more illicit reflexology, because there hadn't been as much certification or health inspection on reflexology centers. And so when the massage centers got more oversight, we saw a lot of criminal switch to reflexology in their strip mall. So that's kind of a big push. And so there's some of those systems reforms within that. And then some of the other common forms are gang controlled trafficking. If you live in a city with a high gang population, that trafficking looks very different than illicit massage, right? Illicit massage, most of the women are coming here on legal work visas. And I'm not sure if I didn't know this until getting into the training. When you're on a legal work visa, you're attached to that one sponsor. That employer is your sponsor. So you can't just quit your job because they didn't pay you and go find another job. It doesn't work like that on a work visa. You're actually stuck with that one employer. If you quit, you have to return to your country. And so that puts populations in a real vulnerable state, because it's like, you get here legally, you've paid all the money, you're here legally, you have a job lined up, and then they stop paying you, or the boss assaults you, or there's all these situations that take place, and you start to realize, if this isn't what I thought it was, but there's not a lot of choices. And so that's, there's different places that you can look to see if anybody has a do not give work visa. Like there's a red flag list from the government that they can look at companies that have been red flagged for having too many work visas, is kind of a red flag when they're trying to get approved to be a sponsor. So there's like lots of different systems within the banking industry that sets up criteria for bank loans, especially if they have heavy work visa requirements within that bank loan for employment. So there's kind of lots of systems within that we work with different bank and financial crimes institutions and their security teams. And then the other ones, like I said, gang, which is going to be a very different recruitment strategy. We see a lot of gang trafficking that's familial, right? If a child is born to a mom or dad that is already a part of a gang lifestyle, that kid has a lot of lack of choices. And we see those children become exploited by other gang members. And then the parents, who might be young gang members themselves, it's like, they're like, what do we do? Do we go against the boss and this whole gang? Do we combat all of, the Bloods or the Crips or whatever it is in their community to try to protect the child? And so that type of recruitment And then that escape becomes very different because the fear and the barriers for that family might be very different than illicit massage in a strip mall. And then the other types of trafficking that are common in communities, familial trafficking. So what we all know is child abuse, but when a drug addicted parent potentially exchanges the abuse of their child for anything of monetary value, for drugs, for rent, for shopping, like school shopping. We've seen moms, unfortunately, exchange the abuse of one child for school clothes for all the kids in her home. And that type of training that we do with different child welfare offices to identify the difference of familial trafficking and child abuse. Some might say, well, why does that really matter? And we let people know, when you've had multiple perpetrators and multiple occurrences, it's a type of trauma called complex compound trauma. And so proper diagnosis leads to proper treatment, right? If you had an ailment, you wouldn't just randomly pick a doctor out of a phone book. You'd want to go if you broke an arm, you'd want to go to an ortho. You'd want to make sure potentially a surgery and a cast and rehab in order to make the best healing decision for your potential broken bone. And so it's a similar concept. Like we want to make sure that proper diagnosis is putting the right wraparound care plan for those children. And then there's pimp controlled exploitation, which happens in different communities. And then cantinas are kind of another common one that we'll see. Cantinas that exist out of, usually they're like sports bars, oftentimes is what it looks like. And so all of those six are usually in most people's community, and they all take very different recruitment, very different awareness, and very different exit plans based on that level of fear that might exist for each group. You can imagine if you're 9 and your mom is obviously doing this to you, that's a very different, not just fear, but that bond is really hard to get kids to come forward, versus if you're 16 and your dad's in a gang and his boss is hurting you. That's a very different level of fear for identification within your community. There's so many more eyes that might see you. So we really try to help people just see all the different types of trafficking that might exist in their community. What we do know is that regardless of the type, regardless of the community or culture in which you live, traffickers target vulnerable people. So they're looking for single moms. They're looking for people that don't really have a good support network. They're looking for people in poverty. They're looking for people that might struggle with houselessness or substance abuse, and they're targeting them. And so as people that work, in vulnerable populations where these intersectionalities take place, we know that if we can identify who's the most at risk in our neighborhoods, traffickers can too. And so how do we put those social support services around communities before traffickers get there? How can we help single moms? How can we help BIPOC communities, LGBTQ communities? How can we make sure that the support and services are in place before they're exploited? And that's really a lot of what that prevention work looks like.
Yeah, thank you for that, Rebecca. That's so both profound and it's so alarming. And the areas where you work are many areas of kind of the underbelly of our economy where most people are not aware, and they certainly don't have the expertise or even the will or the skill to jump in there. And so you are, I was going to ask, why does this matter? I think you've already really explained to us why this matters. And I think I guess for me coming up with, we want to eliminate the wealth gap in a large way and look at the items that are happening, that the safety net in our country isn't there in the way that we need it to be in so many levels. And I think just articulating and getting your story out there about what you're doing, where our system is broken, and you're really going to probably the most broken part of the system. And I just want to applaud you for that and thank you again for your work. And what have we missed? What haven't we covered that our audience would want to know, initiatives within your own organization that you want us to know about?
Yeah, I mean, one of the that first question that I kind of went down the 6 topics, though, it's, how do you notice trafficking in your own neighborhood? What are some things to look for? And I would encourage everyone, there's a real simple formula that I try to say. I might be oversimplifying it, but I just find it's easier to remember when things are simple, right? And we say abuse plus money equals trafficking. And so if you're seeing any signs, whether it's a neighbor or a parent that might be dropping their kid off in school, or oftentimes we're not going to always be able to spot it off a one-time thing. It's kind of like saying, how do you spot an alcoholic, right? Usually it's people in their circle that notice the signs of alcoholism. And it's pretty similar with trafficking. It's going to be someone that you might see more on a regular basis than just a one-time interaction. But any signs of abuse plus money is going to be a red flag for trafficking. If you see signs of domestic violence, heightened responses to typical questions, isolating, not wanting to, communicate or be a part because they don't want you to get to know them at all. Those would be some signs of potential abuse beyond just the physical signs, of course, of physical abuse. But those are some of the non-physical signs of abuse, is kind of that isolation and heightened responses. And then anything with money. So if you know that your neighbor was a single mom, and now all of a sudden she has a new car, or, you're seeing more possessions in a sense, like it can be signs of like, what's going on? Why are they isolating? Why are they not talking to me? Why when I ask them like, hi, nice to meet you, do they have some kind of either withdrawal or heightened, like, I don't want any friends, that kind of response should be kind of red flags for us. And we always encourage people to report any type of red flag to the National Human Trafficking Hotline. I think people get sometimes worried about reporting to the hotline. Well, what if I'm wrong? And we say, well, let the professionals figure out if the tip is wrong. And if it's wrong, then nobody knows that you reported it and everyone goes back to their regular life. But if you were right and you saw something in a restaurant where someone seemed like they couldn't order their own food, but they were driving a really fancy car, that might be a red flag of like, something's wrong here. Like, why is there 3 girls, they're 18, the man's 40, they all can't order their own food, and they're all getting in this really fancy car? That might be a red flag. And so getting the license plate, writing, down any information you have, you think you'll remember, but you don't, putting it in your notes or texting it to yourself, and then calling when you have a free minute, what city you were in, what restaurant. Those things are actually really helpful, and they end up helping. If an investigation is already in place, it helps add clues that the detective and investigator can really rely on. So those would be some like one-off occurrences that you might, but if someone is potentially in closer proximity to you, a neighbor or school, the signs of domestic violence or abuse and money are going to be the equation that we teach people. And then obviously thinking about what we can do in our own lives. Like, if you are a strip mall owner, are you thinking about joining the STOA and getting some of the trainings on how to know proper screening for leasing of, especially as it comes to reflexology or massage, if someone's applying to, rent from you in that establishment. Other ways that you can assist in your community with, whether it is with, living wages and making sure people have living wages, being thoughtful around employment on work visa issues, knowing who's a good player within some of those lists. Like, those are things that I think all of us can do. And even just talking about the issue, right? We all have a lane, we call it, finding your lane, whether it's policy reform and making sure you're voting in a way that empowers the bills that are on the ballot consistently to help fight trafficking, including vacating victims' records, including the non-arrest of children for prostitution. There are still 11 states in the country that arrest children for prostitution. Is your local voting, putting that ballot of the Safe Harbor Act on the measure, is vote for that, representative, governor, or senator that's in your state that is potentially putting safe harbor. Vote on that law when it comes into place. So kind of knowing.
Stop you just for a second. When you, I wasn't clear what you meant when you said, does your state arrest juveniles or youth for prostitution? Can you say more about that? What is that, a good thing or a bad thing to have them?
Well, we don't, I mean, we don't want, I don't want, I shouldn't say we all, but I think we don't want to arrest children for prostitution. We know that there's no 12-year-old criminal mastermind that's driving herself around the city and renting her own hotel room. There's clearly an adult that's also involved. And if children can't consent, then no one should be making money off their abuse, especially. And so, safe harbor law, the Safe Harbor Act is what we should and want to vote on, so that children unarrested for prostitution, and 11 states still do not have safe harbor. Most states do. The other states did enact safe harbor. So when you think about finding your lane, that's just one example, right? Is what does your laws look like? And as you take to the ballot every year, not just in specifically elected officials, but as we pass in different measures within your state, really knowing what that is, like what was Prop 35 in California? What was the Safe Harbor Act? So if this issue is something that you're interested in, and maybe policy is something don't necessarily, there's so many ways you can fight trafficking. I don't want people to feel like I got to go volunteer at a local, shelter. It's like you can do as much as just also making sure to read some of those measures that come up each year and voting on some of the things that impact exploited persons. And then there's all sorts of other ways to fight trafficking, from intervention and donating and being a part of people that are boots on the ground, showing up to those crisis calls, to restoration, supporting your local safe home, and assisting in those prevention. So you're looking at all those intersectionalities. Are we helping in foster care? Are you volunteering or donating in your big brother, big sister? Prevention in terms of, foster care are highly at risk for being trafficked. And so thinking about those communities that intersect with single moms, with foster kids, that's all prevention efforts. We're never going to be able to have data that says, because I was a big brother, big sister this year, one less person was trafficked. We'll never know that. But we do know from just different studies that any young person that has support around them are less likely to be exploited, especially if they come from vulnerable backgrounds. What's known as kind of a high ACEs study, so high adverse childhood experiences. So those are different ways, whether it's policy, intervention and restoration, to prevention, and even job readiness, thinking through if you do own a company, like what are some of your policies around hiring with criminal backgrounds? Would you accept a survivor of trafficking to apply if she had a letter explaining her criminal background? Because some states don't allow vacatur of criminal backgrounds. Arizona, for example, you have to be crime-free 99 years before you can apply to vacate your criminal record. So basically know that prostitution charge will forever be on your record. It's hard to get apartments. It's hard to get jobs. You can't volunteer at your kid's school with that kind of thing on your record. And it's unfortunate because it's not something you did willingly when you're a traffic victim. And you can't help where a trafficker takes you to sell you. And so you don't really have a lot of control over which state based on vacatur. You don't get to pick. I'm grateful my crimes happened in Nevada, and they have a 3-year crime-free policy. So I was able to apply to have my background sealed, my criminal record sealed after 3 years of being crime-free. But Oregon is 10, Texas is 10, Arizona is 99. So it's just really hard to rebuild your life when you have these things. So thinking through, how does that impact you, right? What is your hiring? Would you consider a policy of potential waiver based on circumstance? Would you be an employer that says, hey, we'd be trafficking survivor friendly? And even with a criminal background, if there was a letter from an advocate or a letter from the law enforcement officer that investigated that case, would you be willing to still consider hiring and helping provide a job? So I think all of us can play a role. It just kind of depends on your profession, your experience, what you have access to, your influence in your career in your city, and seeing how you can do your part.
Well, I really appreciate that. And I've already thought of a couple of things, and I jotted some notes just because we do talk to all of the companies in our portfolios over time. And we are particularly interested in how they're thinking about their hiring practices, particularly in this backlash to diversity, equity, inclusion issues. And so we have planned to an additional reach out this fall to additional companies. And what I will do is have our staff look up so that we're really familiar with what are those 11 states. And we can even, get to the point where we are telling companies, when you have employees in these states, that we need to see different policies, and then seeing if there's ways to work around those policies, because it sounds like if you have a letter, that there might be something. And so even just putting this on the HR awareness for the corporations we talk to is something we can add to our list.
Yeah, and we've had with our school, so like I said, we had 1,700 students, and we really try to do job readiness and career exploration for our students. And so some of the corporate partners that we've been able to partner with, they to us and say, hey, we'd like to form a way to help provide jobs to survivors. We might have 3 open paid internships this year, and we really want to provide those to either formerly incarcerated, exploited, or any kind of marginalized, community group. And so we partner with them and we offer a training. One is like how to do trauma-informed management, how to do trauma-informed interviewing, what things might come up within these populations that's specific for their management team. How do they handle that when they do? And so we become like a liaison throughout the internship, where if something does come up that might be a potential trigger, that we can, help either talk to the employee themselves or talk to management or work together as a team to come alongside that. And then we also provide referrals. So anyone that's graduating Elevate, that they have, different tracks that they've selected that might be good placement for that internship. So we provide, a list of referrals, a training, and then we offer to be kind of a liaison throughout that internship. So there's ways to definitely plug in if the corporate responsibility and wanting to really help provide specific openings to people that are in these underserved communities. There's ways that we can also come alongside, that you're not just out like looking for it can be so random. So we want to make sure to let people know there's options and ways that you can do that.
Yeah, I really, really appreciate it. It's, something that all of us want to know. Clearly, those of us here want to know more about and want to know what role we can play. And of course, supporting your work. Donating to the Rebecca Bender Initiative is, one of the primary ways we see, and yet also educating ourselves and then also the companies we work with on what they can do. Feels like the right place for us. What else would you do, or what other words would you have for how we can play in supporting you and then in stopping sex trafficking?
Yeah, well, obviously, I would love to answer questions too if people specifically want to know different ways to get involved. But nonprofits always need funding. We always need resources. Donating stock is always something that's so beneficial, because what you bought it at might not be what, it might have made more money. And so your $50 investment 5 years ago could end up being a $500 donation to a nonprofit today. So considering, how to donate stock, if that's something of interest, we do have we have a way to do that on our website, but I know lots of nonprofits, are accepting stock donations. So thinking through how you can do that, or what you want to transfer a certain number of shares to our account, and we can sell it and be able to help keep paying the salaries to keep the school going. So there's all different ways to do that. But
in there, because that's why I really love that you are highlighting that, because a lot of our clients want to be fossil fuel free, they want to be weapons free, they want to have their portfolios really aligned with the economy that they want to see, and yet they have capital gains that are unrealized. And if they were to sell shares of, say, a petroleum company or a weapons producing company, then they would have taxes to pay. And yet, if they donate those shares to you or your organization, prior to selling them, you don't have those tax consequences, and they get to remove those and also get a tax credit on their. So it's financially, it's something that we really encourage for those people that have extra shares that they don't want to have capital gains. They can just donate them right away to you. So I love that you brought that up. And I think you were going to have some other strategies as well.
no, I think that's spot on. And because we're a 501c3, we don't have the capital gains tax when we do sell the shares. So as soon as you donate to us, we actually sell almost same day, so that we can liquidate and put that money back and to be able to pay our salaries and pay, all of the things to keep the lights on at our school. So it benefits everyone in a sense. Like we won't have the capital gains. We get to sell right away. So it's not like we're still holding on to shares of a company that you're not wanting either. So it works out for everyone. But also, I think just thinking about how to volunteer, your time and your expertise. I think I remember hearing a TED Talk a long time ago that said, do what you love to fight what you hate. And it was this theory around, instead of having, sometimes we see we see organizations that will offer to pay for 1 day of volunteering. You know, you'll be on the clock, but go pick your favorite nonprofit and go volunteer. And they end up walking, you know, dogs at a dog shelter, and that's great and needed, absolutely. But also taking it a step further and thinking, well, these might be some of the best, you know, computer programmers in the world, and they're walking dogs. Like, why not computer program for that nonprofit and redo their website or think through their accounting system? And so thinking through what your real talent is and offering that skill set with a nonprofit, instead of, you know, just thinking, can I come serve on Thanksgiving Day? And so, although all of that's needed, I'm not like minimizing all of that either, but just taking it that one step further, like, well, what is your actual career? What is your real gift? Because if you're a great accountant, nonprofits would always love to have, you know, a third party. We have to put together a, totally drawing a blank on the name, but when you get third party audit every, you know, couple years. And so those are expensive. Sometimes they're $10,000 to get a nonprofit to get a professional third party audit. And that's money that could be used more towards direct service, although we know audits are important, but sometimes it's really hard when you're a smaller nonprofit to know, like, gosh, 10,000 this year, I've got a budget in for an audit. But if you're a great accountant and that's where your skill is, like, offer to maybe assist and join a nonprofit and say, hey, could we offer, especially if it's an in-kind donation, that they could write you, and you end up being able to take that in-kind donation receipt, and you're using your service and skill set in an area that's really needed. So we encourage people to not just potentially give and donate, which we love, but donate stocks, and also think just through maybe ways that your profession and the thing that you've built your career on could be used for a nonprofit, and how to partner with somebody that you're, you know, wanting to further their work. So those are some ways that we encourage people to get involved.
Thank you so much. You are so inspiring. You are really a beacon of hope, I think, for a lot of us that have, you know, had some, I guess, reasons for doubt about this. And yet we see you making real change, and really offering actual solutions, to really end this. And I'm so proud to know you, and really so grateful for your sharing all of your knowledge, and insights with us today.
Thank you. Yeah, fighting trafficking, it's, you know, it was a buzzword for a while, and it kind of died down and back up. And what we like to encourage people, or I like to encourage people, is, you know, 30 years ago, our nation thought about smoking very differently, right? If you remember the times when there was ashtrays on your actual armrests in the airplanes, and your doctor coming in with a cigarette to tell you about your diagnosis on the clipboard. So, you know, there are times that I even can remember when it was like that. And to see how far nations come in shifting the way we just see a health issue is similarly how we want to fight the exploitation of people. We've come a long way, and there's been lots of change, but there's still so much work to do. And so being able to know this is a 30-year plan, this is a 40-year plan on how we shift the way an entire culture sees sex for sale in our communities, and how, with that on the rise, how are we protecting vulnerable people that are being lured in with false pretenses and then trapped in a situation that's really dangerous for them to try to escape? How do we do that? And how do we tackle that at all sides, whether it's buyer, seller, or victim? What are we teaching our young men when we live in this really hypersexual world? How are we fighting demand? How are we helping young people not get into criminal enterprises, right? Like, how do you prevent people from becoming engaged in this issue in all of those aspects, not just victims, but all of it? It's going to take kind of that approach. And it's really about helping some of the most vulnerable people in our neighborhoods, and looking at some of those prevention efforts, and looking at laws and volunteering. It's all of it. So kind of, we encourage people, it can be overwhelming. So just pick one thing, pick the one thing you're good at, or pick the one thing you're passionate about. Read the ballot, vote well. If that's all you do, that's plenty. That's great. We just need everyone to do something.
Yeah. And you're doing so much. So we're going to jump in and do what we can, to follow you and to support your work.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Any other questions or comments from anyone on the screen before we let Rebecca go?
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing your story. It's as Kristen said, so inspiring. I had a quick question around, on the more local level. You mentioned, you know, businesses, right? And licensing, what are some ways you've seen maybe municipalities trying to incorporate some initiatives to make things better? For example, is there any city that requires you take a class before you get a business license, right? Are there anything like that, and what can we as residents push for in our own cities?
Yeah, that's a great question. Some different models that I've seen in different states do have some ways. One of them is, I know we talked about earlier, just the health, the licensing from the local health review center whenever you're going to get your license for your business. So most cities have flagged when someone is applying for a reflexology or massage parlor license. They have more in-depth screening protocols than they used to. I don't know that every city has that yet, but I know that a lot of cities have adapted that for the reason of illicit massage. But even now, like food factories, so any type of meat processing plants in different cities where those exist, those are starting to have a lot more business checklist to clear in order to make sure that their working conditions aren't fueling a labor trafficking economy. Then some other things I've seen just within the local like pre-screening things. So even within the judicial system, so juvenile halls, and they now have screening of trafficking for any intake that comes in. And that sometimes that's hit or miss because it will only be in one city, but we have seen some states roll out a statewide response to screening protocols. And so every county now is getting trained, because what we know about trafficking is traffic victims get moved all over the state, all over the country sometimes, because traffickers are following the money. They're going to conferences, they're looking for the next Consumer Electronics Show or Remax or John Deere conference even. We see heightened trafficking whenever there's conferences in a city. And so if we know that that crime is going to demand the movement of victims, then it's also like, how do we set up some of these, some of these protocols in place of responses to hotels, hotel trainings, onboarding of any employee within a hospitality industry is now starting to have some of this trafficking awareness training for on location, as well as pre-screening, statewide screening responses for anyone that responds to these type of calls or juveniles get picked up. So we're seeing little bits, but I definitely think it's something that needs to get more streamlined, and not just pockets around the country have it, but like all of us can do things like that. What I really love about the financial industry, if anyone, especially on the call, is familiar with ACAMs or ways that different banks screen for loans, there's a lot more protocols in starting a business than there used to be, but I think those need to get enhanced in different banking institutions. So learning some of the signs of both sex and labor trafficking. Sex trafficking, you're going to see a lot more smaller LLCs start up within banking institutions. That's how they launder money. Labor trafficking, you see it through businesses. And so how businesses are getting loans, getting small business loans, getting approvals from that banking industry are starting to have a few more checklists to ensure that those things aren't taking place. But they haven't been established everywhere. So it kind of depends on what industry you're in, but getting creative, right? And thinking through some of these ways of like, how could trafficking impact my industry in a business that I potentially work in? And what are we doing with HR to set up some screening protocols? Could be a great way to get involved.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Great question.
I have a question. You must have opened up a lot of eyes when working and training police departments. Do you look at crime stats and reach out to those police departments, or are they reaching out to you? And how do you start that process of engaging a particular community police department?
Yeah, really good question. You have such good questions. I don't review crime stats and reach out to law enforcement agencies that hadn't been the way I had started. Not that that wouldn't be a great idea to do, but I really just started by putting my own training together on trafficking. And then originally, I think I reached out to a couple law enforcement, this was 10 years ago, a couple law enforcement agencies that work in a human trafficking unit. So there's about 19 HTUs that exist in our country now. I think all of us are familiar with SVU because of Law and Order. Thank you, Dick Wolf. But now there's about 19 cities that have human trafficking units. That's not that many if you think about how many cities exist across the country, but 19 large cities have human trafficking units: Brooklyn, Miami, Vegas, Dallas, the big cities you can think of. Most cities have a task force, what's called a multidisciplinary team, an MDT. And those are funded by the federal government to be a human trafficking MDT. And an MDT consists generally of like your sheriff, maybe one FBI agent, a local shelter representative, like probation office. And so you get together usually once a quarter to talk about the types of trafficking that people are seeing come across their desk in their neighborhood, so that they can really focus on the types of trafficking that exist in that community versus just, mentioning all six is kind of sometimes irrelevant. And so I would start, if I was you, I know it sounds very, very simple, but you could Google whatever city you're in, the name of your city, human trafficking unit, or trafficking MDT, and see who's on that. It'll usually pop up. A lot of them even have their own Facebook pages, because sometimes the community is invited to sit in on an MDT or at least get a report on what's happening with their MDT. And if they don't have one, I would reach out to your local, either your local sheriff or your local district attorney, depending on who you have connections with, or even your local, the attorney general, and just ask, well, what is the MDT in our state? What's this MDT in my city? Do we have one? And know that they can apply for federal grants to have an MDT in their community. Those exist. And most of them require a survivor leader, which is what I'm known as. Most of them require a survivor leader to sit on that task force as well. So you have someone with lived experience, someone with close proximity that's also helping engage in the conversation around what's taking place in the community. So that's where I would start. I would be like, does my city have a task force, right? Whether it's Fresno MDT or wherever it is that people live, and see what pops up on Google. If nothing does, then I would reach out to a local sheriff, even your local major crimes detective. It kind of all varies based on city, on who might be the local go-to to find out. But oftentimes your district attorney, your sheriff, your attorney general, they would know if they have a task force or if one's in development. If they don't have a human trafficking unit, if your city doesn't have an HTU within the district attorney's office, it's usually whatever detective is over major crimes or sex crimes. So if you're a smaller community that doesn't have an HTU, all communities generally do have a sex crime detective, and that person usually gets all the trafficking cases. So they're trying to manage all sex crimes on their file, on their caseload, which is substantial. That it also usually includes human trafficking. All of those types of detectives, any type of sex crimes, intimate partner violence, or trafficking detectives, they get continued education every year. They're often sent to, human trafficking investigators conference or forensic interviewing conference. And so those are the ones that I usually end up getting booked to train at and speak at and hold workshops at. So that's how my part works, but that's how, is that answer? Is it kind of, I've never been asked that before, so I feel like I'm a little all over the place. Like, how would I do that? I'm more verbally processing my answer with you, Greg.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Mhm.
You've been so open, both with your experience, with the work you're doing, with the ideas for us. I know that I've learned more than I have in other conversations I have with you, and I'm guessing that people on our screen have as well. And so, again, just thank you for being that beacon of hope and for being so, so inspiring. And we're going to do what we can at NIA to get more money for your organization, and then we're also going to see how we can incorporate this dialogue with corporations. And we don't have any that we know of. I think revenue's coming from any malls, and yet we do have, all companies are doing hiring, and they can think about how they're doing hiring. And we do talk to our companies about the locations, particularly when it comes to some of the civil rights and gender issues that we work on. And so that will certainly add this to the list of what we're doing at NIA.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Well, thanks for letting me be a part of your guys' community and get to talk about the issue. It's always, I want to say fun. I know it's a hard topic, but it's always fun to find purpose and to make change. And I feel like at least it gets us going of like, oh, we can do something. And this doesn't have to be this giant elephant. Where do you begin to eat it? It's like, well, let's just break it up into these chunks and hopefully we can all do a little something. But I really appreciate your guys' support and time and interest. It really means a lot.
Well, thank you again. And thanks to everyone for engaging with this really difficult elephant and for being a part of that solution.
Yes. Thank you all.
And we'll send it out to our list as well.
Thank you.